Well, obviously the whole conference is about the making of champions, and our sort of keynote speaker is somebody who's had a lot of work to do with champions in various fields. He actually went from being a van driver to running a £65 million recruitment business. He's now one of the most respected business speakers around. He was once telling me, he was telling me at lunchtime, that he was once introduced at a conference very similar to this as being the most magnificent speaker in the world who was guaranteed to transform all your lives. Well, I can tell you he's not and he won't, but he is quite good. So would you welcome, please, Jeff Grout.
What makes a champion? Talent, certainly, but talent alone won't make you the best. Immediately after England's 5-1 thrashing of Germany in Munich back in 2001, the England coach Sven-Goran Eriksson was asked what he'd done to transform the performance of the same group of players that had lost at home under Kevin Keegan. After a long pause, he said, "First, you must start with the head." 2 years later, Clive Woodward was asked to predict the outcome of the Rugby World Cup. And he said, the tournament will be won in the head. And their comments prompted me to investigate the mental aspects of championship performance. And a few years ago, I embarked on a series of interviews with a whole range of sporting champions, their coaches, and their psychologists. And there was a chorus of agreement from all I interviewed was that their success was far more to do with their attitude than their ability. Ron Dennis, the team chief of McLaren, said, "Life is a mind game. And whatever field you want to be successful, it starts and finishes with the mind." Sally Gunnell said, "The difference between silver and gold is all down to mental attitude." Now, therefore, champions are not only physically fitter, they're mentally fitter. And there's considerable relevance for us in terms of how champions prepare and perform, because we use the same mental processes. It's just in champions, those processes are more highly developed. You see, it's only when we totally accept that our attitude is within our own control can we totally perform to our best. Because when we get up in the morning, no one tells us to be positive or negative, happy or sad. It is our choice. And if you think about it, often it's the weather in our head that creates the climate for the day. You see, it's my belief that if we can improve our mental skills, we can improve our performance in whatever endeavour we choose. And in fact, in business, there has been really a lack of interest in mental performance. And I believe mental performance can give us all a competitive edge. So, as a result of my session, I don't expect you to leave here with the mindset of an Olympic champion, but I hope you'll draw some relevance for your own situation as I examine the attitudes and behaviours of champions. Champions dream like the rest of us, except that champions have a greater ability to make those dreams real. Michael Johnson, who was the world and Olympic 400-metre champion, said, "I craft my dreams into ambitions. I refine my ambitions into goals. I turn my goals into plans." Adrian Morehouse, the Olympic swimmer, planned to win his Olympic gold medal at the age of 12. He'd watched his fellow countryman David Wilkie win at the Montreal Olympics. And the very next day, he walked into the local swimming baths in Harrogate in Yorkshire, and he tugged on the sleeve of one of the coaches. And he said to the coach, "I want to be Olympic champion." And instead of telling him to run along and not be silly, he said, "Okay, if you're going to be Olympic champion, what time are you going to win it in?" And they then sat by the poolside for about 20 minutes or so, predicting the winning time in the 100 metres breaststroke in 8 years' time, when Morehouse would be 20. They predicted a time of 63 seconds. The coach then turned to Morehouse and said, "What's your fastest time?" And as a 12-year-old, his fastest time was 78 seconds. That 15-second gap was a yawning chasm. So the coach broke it down by year, by month, by week, by day, and showed Morehouse if he improved his performance by less than 1/5000th of a second a day, he could be Olympic champion. But that's not all. He said, where did you come in last year's under-13 championships in Harrogate? And Morehouse had won a bronze medal. He said, right, our first objective is to win the Harrogate Championships. We'll then enter the North Yorkshire, then all of Yorkshire, then the North of England, then all England. He broke it down to make it achievable. You see, all champions set goals and objectives for themselves. And all champions are much more sophisticated goal setters than we are in business, because they tend to set a number of self-supporting goals. They have an outcome goal, which in Morehouse's case was a gold medal. They have a performance goal, which in Morehouse's case was 63 seconds. And then they have a process goal, which is all about the how to get there. In his case, about technique. His dive, the quality of his stroke, the efficiency of his tumble turn. And the trouble you see in business, we spend a lot of our time focused on the outcome goal. You see, Morehouse, once he determined he wanted to be Olympic champion and the time he was going to win it in, devoted all his time and energy towards the process. How to get there. And in business, we overcomplicate. You see, in sport, they have much greater clarity about what their objective is. And they narrow their focus on the 2 or 3 things that will make the greatest difference. Multiple Olympic champion Carl Lewis said, if you want to be successful, the first thing you must do is work out what you want to achieve. Secondly, you need to calculate the price associated with that. And thirdly, you must pay that price. And let's be honest, most of us don't get beyond the second stage. Champions have a remarkable determination to succeed, matched only by their discipline. Ellen MacArthur, the round-the-world yachtsman, she determined at the age of 12 that she wanted to own a yacht which was big enough for her to sleep on. And therefore, she saved every penny she could towards her goal. She never received any pocket money, so she went without a school lunch for 6 years in order to devote that towards this ultimate goal. Sally Gunnell, as a young athlete, was told by a leading UK athletics promoter, you're never going to make it. You're too small, you're the wrong colour. You might as well give up now. All that did was actually to spur Sally Gunnell on to actually make all the effort she needed to do to become world and Olympic champion. Sebastian Coe says that part of a champion is a bloody-minded determination to be better than somebody else. In his case, it was his arch-rival, Steve Ovett. Coe was one of the first athletes to train twice a day in what was the so-called amateur era. And not unsurprisingly, in the early 80s, he decided to give himself Christmas Day off. So he got up, like most of us, had a leisurely breakfast, opened his presents, but all he could think about was his rival, Ovett. And mid-morning, he couldn't give any longer. He put on his tracksuit and his running shoes and went out for a training run. He came back feeling a whole lot better and sat down and enjoyed his Christmas lunch. But his Christmas pud was spoiled because, again, he started thinking about Steve Ovett. So after lunch, he put on his tracksuit and training shoes again and went out for a second training run. In fact, that night, he went out for a third run, the only time that year he trained 3 times, because he couldn't believe his rival would train 3 times on Christmas Day. Champions have an innate curiosity, a curiosity to find better ways of doing things. Clive Woodward, as England rugby coach, had at his disposal a very sophisticated computerized mapping tool called Prozone. And Prozone had sensors around Twickenham Stadium which could recognize the facial features of every player. And Prozone would map a game in 2 dimensions, like a game of chess. And Clive Woodward could press a button against the player's name, and it would tell him exactly how far that player had run and at what average speed, how many tackles the player had made and at what average force. And not unsurprisingly, the players described Prozone as Big Brother. And Prozone, or Big Brother, showed Clive Woodward about 5 years ago that the performance of the England rugby team in the first 10-15 minutes of the first half was always superior to the same period in the second half. So he called a meeting of all the players, of all the coaches, to a hotel conference room to brainstorm this variation in performance. People offered all kinds of suggestions, and a young player right at the back of the room put his hand up and he said, well, one difference is that for the first half, we all run out in brand new, bright white kit in a prescribed order, captain, vice-captain. For the second half, we amble out in 2s and 3s, invariably in dirty, mudded kit. Maybe we should change our kit at half-time. Senior pros like Johnson and Delalio greeted this with hoots of derision, but Woodward's a magpie. He will try anything if it improves performance. And if you're a rugby fan, you'll remember that about 5 years ago, the England team started changing their entire kit at half-time. You see, from that point on, they were no longer playing a first half and a second half. They were playing 2 first halves where the score is 0-0. You see, when they changed their kit at half-time, they were also changing their mindset. Clive Woodward is a regular business speaker, and about 2 years ago he spoke to Jaguar in Coventry, and he spoke to the senior management team, and they were quite intrigued about this whole thing about changing kit at half-time, because as a company, what they recognised was their financial performance often slipped away in the second half of the year. And they resolved from that point on that Jaguar would no longer operate a first half and second half of the financial year. They would operate 2 first halves, and at half year the board of directors all go out and buy brand new suits. And the reality is, I've never come across a successful sportsman or an entrepreneur who said, this is the way we do it here. Because successful people are constantly looking for better ways, cheaper ways, more efficient ways of doing things. And as Ron Dennis, the team chief of McLaren, says, the biggest obstacle to continued success is continued success. Because then we stop trying quite so hard. Successful organisations are always reinventing themselves and innovating.